Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 2 of Forget Your Warranty, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of aftermarket tuner cars. And this series is a little bit more eclectic than some of my others. They tend to fit into very specific categories. You've got hot hatches, you've got sedans, you've got supercars, you've got GT cars, etc. This series though, although under one broad category, aftermarket tuning, kind of has, in effect, 3 subcategories within that. You've got your straightforward aftermarket tuner cars, vehicles which are more street spec but increase the performance of the vehicle. That would include stuff like the Tom's Chaser and most of the roof models. Then though, you also have vehicles which are aftermarket tuners but more inclined towards being drift spec, such as the HKS Silvia and the Blitz models. Then you have the third group, which is, again, aftermarket tuners, but more competition spec, such as the Time Attack Evo that we reviewed last time, and various others which are much more competition spec vehicles. The Option Stream Z from Nissan as well is a perfect example of that. Now in this particular pick, this is kind of a mix of the straightforward street class and the competition class, because this is an RX-7, as you can see of course. It's an FD3 RX-7, and it's aftermarket tuned by a pretty respected company. It's been on Gran Turismo for a while now, but they're known more for their race cars rather than their tuner cars. And the company is, and I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, and I don't particularly care either, but it's RE Amemiya, or Amemiya, and the car is, as I said, more of a street-based vehicle, whereas we tend to think of them as being their GT300 cars in the forefront of most players' minds. That's what they're known for, that's what they're good at, and they are very good GT300 cars in Gran Turismo. So the question is, does that translate to this more road-oriented version? I would say yes, it does. Because one interesting thing straight off the bat about aftermarket tuner cars, at least on Gran Turismo, and this is kind of ironic, is that fully tuned, almost all of them have less power than you can get out of the normal production model. If you compare the pre-tuned Skylines, for instance, to the premium Skylines from Nissan, the Nissan version is more powerful when fully tuned than the aftermarket cars are when they're fully tuned. And it's not just with the Skyline, various other models experience that as well, and that's very strange. That also happens with this RX-7. This has less power than the premium Bathurst RX-7 does when you fully tune it, which is very ironic considering the point of a tuner car is to improve it. At the same time, these cars are for the most part set up for very specific purposes. They are finely tuned machines, and breaking that, in effect, by increasing their power levels, lowering the weight even more so, etc., you're kind of knocking that out of place. So it is still strange that they do have less power, but at the same time they are set up in very specific ways. So this particular vehicle, although not as powerful, I would say is potentially just as good as other RX-7s, especially around the track. Because although it's not as powerful, and certainly not as quick, it does have some very distinct good points. And one of those is handling, but we'll get to that in just a second. Now, being an RX-7, it's powered of course by a rotary engine. It's rated at roughly 1.3 litres, but as we all know, rotaries isn't really an exact art when it comes to measuring capacity, so take the 1.3 litre with a pinch of salt. You can turbocharge that engine up to 647 horsepower and 508 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty good for a rotary. They're not typically that torquey. As far as weight, it's not as light as you might expect, but it's certainly not overly heavy. It weighs 1,153 kilos, so roughly the same as a GT300 or GT500 car. As far as horsepower per tonne, it puts out 561, which is not bad. And the PP is quite high, a little bit higher than most of the RX-7s from the Mazda dealership at 599. It's certainly not too high because it is a competitive car, but it is higher than the other RX-7s. Now, it is a full premium, so you get that detailed interior, etc. And as far as value for money, it's not that bad for a tuner car. It costs 100 grand, so the affordability is quite good. It's very easy for an aftermarket tuner car to have a much higher price, as some of them do. I'm looking at you, HPA Motorsports TT Quattro. But this particular model is, I would say, good value. And as far as I mentioned earlier, the handling, it's very good. And I would say that the handling overall is possibly the best thing about this car. In comparison to the Bathurst, for instance, as we already mentioned, it's nowhere near as quick. The top speed on this car is around 220, 225 under its own power, which isn't bad. That's certainly better than most of the other aftermarket cars, but at the same time it's nowhere near the roughly 265 bordering on 270 that the Bathurst and various other RX-7s can do when fully tuned. So for pure straight line performance, it's just not the kind of car that you should be going for if you want an RX-7, especially for top end performance. For handling though, around the track this car is much more composed, much more controlled, and it feels more grippy, I would say, than the production RX-7s. The updates that RE Amemiya have done to the vehicle make it feel much more like a competition spec machine, and that is a great thing for the RX-7. And it means that in effect you've got two options. If you want more performance in a straight line way, you could go for the production car, whereas if you want something that's more taut and track focused, you could go for this car. So as for when I'd recommend using it, it's potentially a good car for multiple PP levels, so it's really down to driver discretion, but it certainly is capable of winning races, and it's a choice of car which not many people tend to use that often. But that's it overall for this particular review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.